Hello, I'm Simon Whistler. You're watching Today I Found Out, and in the video today, the story of Tommy Fitz and his drunken bet. Thomas Fitzpatrick, known to his friends as Tommy Fitz, was a native of Washington Heights, Manhattan, who, although he had moved to New Jersey, still hung out with his old friends from the neighborhood. A wild bunch, Tommy's crew were adventurous and enjoyed frequenting area bars. Late in the evening, or rather early in the morning of September 30th, 1956, he was leaving a tavern on St. Nicholas Avenue in Manhattan to return home. At this time, Tommy bet one of his buddies that he could make it back to the bar from New Jersey in a mere 15 minutes. This, of course, is impossible by car, so after leaving the bar on that September night, Tommy traveled to the Teterboro School of Aeronautics in New Jersey, where he then stole a single-engine plane. Hoping to evade authorities until his return task was completed, he took off without lights at around 3 a.m. According to reports, his original plan was to land the plane at the field of George Washington High School, just a few blocks from the tavern. However, since lights weren't on that early in the morning, a drunken Tommy chose to land the plane in front of the tavern itself on St. Nicholas Avenue, near its intersection with 191st Street. He actually managed to thread the needle, successfully avoiding lampposts and parked cars while he was making his landing. Of course, landing a plane in the middle of a street in Manhattan was bound to get noticed, and the cops were called in. Eventually charged with grand larceny, Tommy was never convicted, since the plane's owner, presumably amused by the whole thing and with no harm done to his plane, refused to press any charges. However, since the city's ordinances prohibited landing planes on its streets, Tommy was fined about $100, which is $800 today, and had his pilot's license suspended for 6 months. Just over 2 years later, again after imbibing at a Washington Heights bar, Tommy repeated the feat. This time, Fitz had been telling the story of his first flight when another patron questioned the authenticity of the story. Essentially, this man was calling him a liar. His Honor put to the question at about 1 a.m. on October 4th, 1958, the inebriated Tommy again went to the Teterboro School of Aeronautics in New Jersey and borrowed a plane in order to fly back to New York City. This time, he landed the plane at the nearby intersection of Amsterdam and 187th Street. After landing the plane, he initially fled the scene. However, when police were called in and once again found themselves with a plane sitting in the middle of a Manhattan street and recalling the unique incident 2 years before just a few blocks away, they decided to go investigate and see if Mr. Fitz had something to do with this one too. At first, he reportedly denied it, but witnesses who saw him exit the plane and run off claimed that it was him, ultimately inspiring Fitz to confess. He later succinctly summed up his decision-making paradigm in choosing to perform the feat again, stating, "It's the lousy drink." With this second incident, there was no mercy. The magistrate judge, Reuben Levy, threw the book at him, saying, "Had he been properly jolted then, it's possible this would not have occurred a second time." The 28-year-old Tommy Fitz was sentenced to 6 months in prison for transporting stolen property. Beyond his flying escapades and little stint in prison, Tommy Fitz had a full life, serving as a Marine in the Korean War and earning a Purple Heart. He later enjoyed a 51-year marriage to an apparently extremely understanding wife, Helen. They had 3 sons together, he worked as a steam fitter, and lived to the ripe old age of 79, dying in 2009. And now for a bonus fact. While a much easier landing, the aerial adventure of one Matthias Rust in 1987, and where he ended up landing, made his trip a little more historic. The then 18-year-old German had been flying around Europe in a rented plane when he got the bright idea to see if he could fly to Moscow and land in the Kremlin. And do bear in mind this was 1987, during the Cold War. Starting from Helsinki-Malmi Airport and claiming he was headed to Stockholm before taking off, Rust made the attempt. Along the way, he was warned off several times, had Soviet air defenses tracking him, and had soldiers repeatedly requesting permission to shoot him down, but they were denied each time. On top of uncharacteristic restraint by command, a series of gaffes on the military part allowed Rust to make the Kremlin without being destroyed. However, along the way he decided his original idea was a bad one, as he assumed that he'd simply be arrested inside the fortress and that the government would deny the event. This meant no one in the public would know what he did. Instead, he decided he'd try landing in Red Square. However, after a pass over the square, he found that there were too many people walking around that area to make it feasible. He ultimately landed on a bridge by St. Basil's Cathedral around 7 p.m. on May the 27th, 1987. After the landing, Rust, who was of course arrested, was ultimately sentenced to 4 years in a labor camp in the Soviet Union. However, 2 months later, as a sign of goodwill to the West, Mikhail Gorbachev ordered that Rust be released. It has been claimed by retired 3-star general and former director of the NSA, William Odom, that the military mistakes that ultimately allowed Rust to penetrate the Soviet Union's vaunted defenses and fly over the Kremlin allowed Gorbachev to remove many of his strongest military opponents, with the event severely tarnishing the military's reputation in the eyes of the public. And indeed, as a result of Rust's little adventure, the likes of Sergei Sokolov, the Minister of Defense Marshal, and Alexander Koldunov, the Commander-in-Chief of the Soviet Air Defense Forces, were dismissed from their positions. This was among other people, and according to Odom, this helped expedite the collapse of the Soviet Union. Upon returning home to Germany, Rust managed to make a cool 100,000 Deutschmarks, which converted to dollars and accounting for inflation is about $102,000 today, by granting Stern magazine the exclusive rights to interview him for his official version of the story. Hopefully he saved some of that for a lawyer, because just 2 years later, Rust was arrested for stabbing and nearly killing a female co-worker at a West German hospital where he was doing community service. The woman in question had reportedly rejected Rust's romantic advances. Rust ultimately served 15 months in prison for attempted manslaughter. So I really hope you found that video interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. Brand new videos just like this every day of the week. Also over there on the right, some other videos from the archives that you might enjoy if you enjoyed this one. And as always, thank you for watching.